Okay, so today we're going like deep, deep, deep into Philippine politics.
All right, that sounds good.
And we're looking at this article you sent me about President Bongbong Marcos Jr. and Vice President Sara Duterte.
Yeah, it's from Neo-Finoi.
Yeah, exactly, from Neo-Finoi. And it's sort of about, I guess, the cracks that are starting to show in their alliance.
Their Unite team, as they called it.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's really quite fascinating to see this dynamic play out, especially, I guess, given, the historical context of the Philippines.
Right. Yeah, we can't talk about Bongbong Marcos Jr. without talking about his father, right?
Yeah.
Ferdinand Marcos Sr.
Absolutely. I mean, for anyone who might not know too much about the history of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was elected president in 1965. And I mean, he really left a very complex and controversial legacy.
For sure. So what would you say like the crash course is like on his rule and why it matters now? Like how does that tie into what we're seeing with his son?
All right. So basically, Marcos Sr., his rule, it started out, I guess you could say, promising, but he quickly, sort of became more authoritarian. His grip on power tightened, and he implemented martial law, which led to a really dark period in Philippine history. There were widespread human rights abuses, allegations of corruption, cronyism. A lot of these things have really kind of stuck with the Marcos name.
Right. And so like I guess all of that like really sets the stage for what we're seeing now with Bongbong Jr. because there's obviously a lot of baggage there, right?
Totally. I mean, that history is something that Marcos Jr. has sort of, had to grapple with throughout his entire political career.
Yeah, and then of course you've got Sara Duterte, who's like this powerful figure in her own right,
Yes.
right? Her father was president before.
Exactly. Rodrigo Duterte. And I mean, he also had a very controversial presidency.
Yeah, very much so.
And known for his war on drugs, which
Yeah.
was incredibly brutal, and also for his sort of, like tough talking populist style.
So Neo-Finoi really emphasizes this idea of the uni team, right? This alliance between Bongbong and Sara,
Yeah.
which seem very, very powerful, right? Because you have the Marcos stronghold in the solid north, and then you have the Duterte support in the south, particularly in Mindanao. So they really combine these like two regional power bases.
And they really ran on this platform of unity and continuity, right? I mean, that was their big thing, unity and continuity. And I think a lot of Filipinos really bought into that idea.
Yeah, it seemed very, very powerful at the time. And, Neo-Finoi lists like the promises that they were making, infrastructure projects, economic revitalization, and then, of course, continuing the drug war, which had been a really big issue under Duterte's father.
And that's, I think, where we start to see some of those cracks emerge because, the article points out that there are some pretty significant differences between Bongbong and Sara in terms of their leadership styles and their approaches to certain issues.
Yeah, like how would you describe those differences? Like how would you contrast them?
Well, I think with Bongbong, you see someone who's a little bit more measured, a little bit more calculated, even trying to present himself as a diplomat on the world stage, trying to build international relationships, maybe even distance himself a little bit from the more controversial aspects of his father's legacy, or even Duterte's father's legacy.
Right. It seems like he's really trying to cultivate this image of like stability and kind of like a more moderate approach, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah. And then on the other hand, you have Sara Duterte, who's, she's very much her father's daughter.
Yeah, she's got that kind of like fiery, tough-talking approach.
Exactly. She's not afraid to speak her mind. And she's definitely not shying away from controversy. I mean, she's become more assertive, more vocal about her own ambitions. And so I think you're starting to see a little bit of a power struggle emerge there.
Yeah, that tension is definitely there. And then Neo-Finoi points out some really specific areas where they clash, like their stance on foreign policy, for example.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Bongbong seems to be leaning more towards the U.S.
Well, he even has ties to, the incoming Trump administration, right?
Yeah, he's got a family friendship with President-elect Trump, while Duterte seems to be sticking with that close relationship that her father had with China.
Exactly. And that's huge. I mean, that's a major point of contention because, the U.S. and China are vying for influence in the region, and the Philippines is kind of caught in the middle.
Yeah, that's like a whole other deep dive we could do, right?
Yeah.
Just on that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But then there's also this whole issue of the drug war, right?
Right. I mean, that's something that both Bongbong and Sara have said they want to continue, but their approaches seem very different.
Yeah, like Duterte seems to be all in on that, like really harsh approach that her father took.
Which, has led to allegations of human rights abuses extrajudicial killings. I mean, it's been incredibly controversial, and, some sectors in the Philippines have even called for the International Criminal Court to investigate.
Yeah.
Well, Bongbong, he's talking more about like a rule of law approach, trying to emphasize due process and things like that.
So it's like, on one hand, you've got this like really hardcore approach, and then Bongbong's kind of trying to, I guess, like soften the edges a little bit.
Exactly.
Maybe make it seem a little bit more palatable to the international community.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern internationally about, the human rights implications of the drug war.
Yeah, for sure.
And so Bongbong is sort of walking a tightrope there, trying to appease both sides.
So on top of all of that, like all of these like really big issues, you've also got these questions about Duterte's use of confidential and intelligence funds.
Yeah, there have been a lot of questions raised about transparency and accountability there.
Yeah, and then of course there's the impeachment case that's been filed against her.
Right, I mean, that's a whole other layer of complexity to this whole situation.
So it's interesting because Neo Finoi talks about how, initially there was so much excitement about this uni team and this idea of unity, but now you're seeing a lot of division even among their supporters.
Yeah, I think people are starting to see that maybe this alliance wasn't as solid as it seemed.
So like, where do you think this is all headed?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's really hard to say. I mean, it's possible that Bongbong and Sarah find a way to work through their differences to kind of put aside their personal ambitions for the sake of the country.
Yeah.
But it's also very possible that this tension continues to grow and that we see a real power struggle emerge.
Yeah. And what do you think that would mean for the Philippines if that were to happen?
Well, it would be a very, very messy and unpredictable situation.
Yeah, for sure.
You could see political instability, you could see gridlock, you could see a lot of uncertainty about the future, and I think that's something that a lot of Filipinos are very concerned about right now.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I guess that's where we leave it with our listeners is like, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, this is a really fascinating story that's still unfolding, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out.
Definitely, and I think it's a story that has implications not just for the Philippines, but for the region and the world.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks for breaking this all down.
Of course, anytime.
And to our listeners out there, stay tuned because we're going to be back with more deep dives into the stories that matter.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll see you next time.
See you later.